Hello friends, welcome to this new video of the first chapter, Historical Background of Indian Polity. Friends, I want to include real arts in the field of education so that we can make studies more attractive and interesting. Okay, so let's study UPSC with real arts and let's include real arts in education. Okay. Friends, after watching today's video, everything will become crystal clear in your mind regarding the trade or business of the British East India Company. In today's video, we will talk about what were the objectives behind the British while coming to India. We will see how the British East India Company traded between India, China, Southeast Asia and Europe. How did it trade and what goods or items were exchanged in it? What did the company bring from Europe to India and China and what did it take from these countries to Europe? We will see what the British East India Company exported from India to Europe, China and other countries. Along with this, in this video, we will also understand the background of opium cultivation and opium war by the British East India Company friends. We will understand why opium cultivation was so important for the British East India Company. Apart from this, we will see what the British East India Company exported from China to India and Europe at this time. Friends, we will also see how this triangular trade system between India, China and Europe by the British East India Company strengthened the power of the East India Company and the British economy. What benefits did the British East India Company and Britain get from this? Also, what effect did this triangular trade of the British East India Company have on the artisans, farmers and society of India at this time? Friends, we will understand all these topics in detail and very easily in today's video. Okay? Before this friends, I have a small request for all of you. If you have not subscribed to this channel, then please do subscribe this channel and press the bell icon also so that you can get our other such videos first. Because friends, it takes a lot of hard work to make such videos and if you do not support those who work hard in the right direction, then whom will you support? Also, share this video with as many people as possible friends. So friends, let's start this historical background. Okay? Friends, although the British East India Company or the British had many objectives of coming to India, but their first and main objective was to earn maximum profit by doing maximum trade with India. That is, their main objective of doing business in India was to earn more economic profit friends. Okay? They saw India as a huge market and source of raw materials. The British East India Company mainly engaged in trade between India, China, Southeast Asia and Europe, involving the exchange of commodities such as spices, cotton, silk, indigo, saltpeter, tea, opium and salt. At this time, there was a huge demand for these goods in Europe. They used to sell the goods bought from Europe in India and China, and then they used to buy goods from these countries and take them to Europe and sell them at high prices. This used to give them huge profits. Their second objective was to leave behind the competing European and other foreign powers. Friends, Portugal and Dutch were already trading in India from Europe at this time. Apart from this, Arab traders had already established their foothold in the trade here. The objective of the British was to establish a trade monopoly in India by removing these competitors. For this, they also fought many wars from time to time and in this way, the British tried to exclude other European companies from India's trade. Their third objective was to gain political and administrative power and establish military control. The British East India Company initially came to India on the pretext of trade. But after the trade monopoly, the objective of the company became to establish political and administrative control in India, so that they could control Indian resources and economy in their own interest. The British gradually established their political and military control over many areas of India friends, so that they do not face any hindrance in trade. Their fourth objective was friends to ensure the supply of raw materials and make India a market for British goods. The British East India Company wanted to provide raw materials to the industries of England at cheap rates by ensuring a continuous supply of raw materials. After the British Industrial Revolution, the British aimed to make India a big market for their industrial products like wooden clothes, metal goods, etc. In this objective, they looked upon India as a huge market and source of raw materials. They used to procure things like cotton, indigo, tea, and opium from India at cheap rates and sell them in England and provide raw materials to the industries there. For this, a unilateral free trade policy was implemented in India, which caused losses to Indian industries and promoted British goods in India. Their fifth objective was to find a consumer market. The British East India Company was looking for a large consumer market to sell the goods manufactured in British industries. And for this also they chose India, because at that time India was a very large consumer market. The British wanted to make India a market for their British goods. Their sixth objective was imperialism and colonization, friends. A major objective behind the company was to promote British imperialism and bring India under colonial control. Apart from this, after establishing political and military control, the company added another objective to its list of objective, friends, that is to earn revenue and income from land. The company implemented the land revenue system and collected more taxes from the farmers, and also made land revenue a major source of income. The company also exerted social and religious influence in India. Although the East India Company's initial primary focus was trade, but over the time it also encouraged Christian missionaries to influence Indian society and education. After the Charter Act of 1813, the company financially supported missionaries to carry out social and educational reforms and to spread English education. Okay? So this was the purpose behind the British East India Company coming to India, friends. Since the main trade of the East India Company was between India, China, Southeast Asia and Europe, friends. So now we talk about how and what things the British East India Company traded between India, China, Southeast Asia and Europe. Okay. So first of all, friends, let's talk about what the British East India Company exported from India to Europe and other countries. So friends, at this time, spices, cotton cloth, silk, salt, opium, indigo and other items were sent to Europe from India by the British East India Company. Along with Indian spices and silk, there was a huge demand for Indian cotton in Europe at this time, due to which Britain's textile industry also developed rapidly. Friends, at this time, the East India Company used to export cotton and cotton cloth from Bengal, Madras, Surat and Gujarat of India to London, Europe and Africa by taking them by sea in its big ships. They used to send spices like black pepper, cardamom, cinnamon, nutmeg, etc. to Europe from South India and Malacca. At this time, the East India Company used to send silk from Bengal and China to the rich people of Europe. Saltpeter was sent from Bengal and Bihar to all of Europe, which was used in European wars. Friends, saltpeter was a key ingredient in making gunpowder at that time, which was needed by all of Europe at that time, so that they could use it in wars with other European traders. Because gunpowder was made from Indian saltpeter at that time, which was very important for the war machineries of Britain and Europe. And at that time, they used to get a good amount of saltpeter from India. Friends, at this time, there was a huge demand for natural blue color in Europe. So the British East India Company started indigo cultivation on a large scale in India. Its cultivation first started in Bengal in 1777 and later spread to areas like Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, etc. The British forcibly made Indian farmers cultivate indigo. Farmers who refused had to face punishment and torture. Indigo cultivation would quickly make the land barren, due to which the farmers were ruined financially. Despite this, the British would buy indigo from the farmers at a very low prices and sell it at high prices in Europe. Farmers were given loans for indigo cultivation, friends, but the interest on it was very high, due to which they also got trapped in the debt trap. Now friends, let's talk about the background of opium cultivation and the Opium War. Why was opium cultivation and its trade so important for the British? So look friends, the British East India Company used to send spices, cotton cloth, silk, indigo and salt from India to Europe. Apart from this, the company used to produce opium from India and sell it in China, from which they got a lot of silver. The company used to invest this silver obtained from the opium trade in India, and after buying goods from India, they used to take them to European markets so that they could sell them at higher prices in Europe. Okay? Actually, at this time, due to the popularity of Chinese tea, Britain was facing a huge export of silver, friends, because China accepted only silver in exchange for tea, due to which Britain's export of silver increased. Due to this huge export of silver in exchange for tea, Britain was facing a loss in trade with China. To balance this, the British East India Company started producing opium in India and selling it in China. Okay? Friends, at this time, the company used to smuggle opium from Bihar and Bengal to China. The East India Company grew opium in Bihar and Bengal and sold it illegally in China. Opium smuggling in China was highly controversial and illegal activity, friends, and China also strongly opposed it. They banned the import of opium, but still the British East India Company continued to smuggle opium on a large scale forcibly and secretly. This created a social and economic crisis in China because gradually people in China started getting addicted to opium, due to which China was forced to give silver to Britain. Later, due to this, the Opium Wars took place in 1839, in which Britain defeated China and continued its opium trade in China. Friends, at this time, the British East India Company used to send some amount of opium from India to Europe as well. Okay? Now friends, let's talk about what the British East India Company exported from China to India and Europe at this time. Friends, just as cotton cloth, spices, silk, indigo, opium and salt were sent from India to Europe, similarly, tea, silk and porcelain were exported from China to Europe. The first among these is the export of tea. Friends, during this time, in the 18th and 19th century, Chinese tea was very popular in Britain and America. Since 1698, the East India Company had established its trade monopoly on this trade of tea and China. However, after 1833, the company's monopoly on trade with China and tea trade ended. Tea was bought from a place called Canton in China, which falls within Guangzhou city, and exported in large quantities to Britain and America by the East India Company. The second is export of silk and porcelain. Friends, at this time, China's fine silk and porcelain were sent from China to Europe. Apart from this, musk and medicinal herbs were also exported from China to Europe and India. However, their trade was not as big as tea, silk and porcelain. To buy goods from India and China, the British East India Company mostly used silver and gold as payment, because China especially accepted silver in exchange for tea. The British used to bring these goods from Europe to India and China from time to time, we see. Now let's talk about what things the British East India Company imported from Europe to India and China at this time. Friends, the goods imported by the British East India Company from Europe to India and China at this time included many things. The first of which is the import of woolen cloths. Friends, at this time, the British East India Company used to bring woolen cloths from Britain and sell them in the Indian and Chinese markets. But the demand for these items was low here, because the traditional textile industries in India was already strong at that time, and woolen cloths were also not suitable for the local climate. Therefore, their sale in India was limited and was not so much that the British East India Company could do proper business in India with the profit obtained from it. Okay? The second import item included in this is import of weapons and ammunition. Friends, the East India Company used to bring weapons and ammunition from Europe to India and other colonies and sell them to the soldiers and local kings there, so that they could use them in their wars. The company also used these weapons and ammunition for its army, wars and for its own protection. After this, the third import item included in it is import of silver and gold. The British East India Company used to send large amount of silver and gold from Europe to India and China, because the goods purchased by the company from China and India were mainly paid for in silver. Gold was also imported, but silver was used more, especially in trade with China. And the fourth import item included in this was import of industrial goods from Britain. Friends, some industrial goods made in Britain, such as woolen cloths and metal items, were sold in India, but their demand was low here, because initially traditional industries were already strong in India. But this triangular trade of East India Company between Europe, India and China led to Industrial Revolution in Britain. After the Industrial Revolution in Britain, import of cheap British goods increased in India, due to which Indian weavers, artisans, craftsmen and skilled workers suffered. Friends, at this time, silver, gold, woolen cloths, weapons, etc. were sent from Britain to India and China through sea routes only. Okay? Now friends, let's talk about the impact of this triangular trade of the British East India Company on the artisans, farmers and society of India at this time. So friends, this business of the company had a deep impact on Indian artisans, farmers and society as well. Friends, at this time in India, the company forced the farmers to cultivate opium. They were paid low prices for their labor and farmers were also punished for not cultivating opium. On one hand, the company was making huge profits from this opium trade, while on the other hand, due to this exploitative system, the farmers of Purvanchal, that is Bihar, Jharkhand and eastern Uttar Pradesh, become more and more poor financially. At this time, opium cultivation was increasing so much friends that due to this, food grain production also started decreasing, due to which tragedies like the Bengal famine of 1770 occurred and millions of people died. Due to the commercial and colonial exploitative policies of the British East India Company, India's traditional cottage and handicraft industries were ruined and closed down friends. It became difficult for Indian weavers, artisans, craftsmen and skilled workers to survive in front of the cheap British goods, due to which their livelihood was snatched away and unemployment was also increased. Almost all traditional industries were ruined and poverty and inequality increased in the society. Because friends, this triangular trade system of the East India Company between India, China and Europe strengthened the British economy a lot, due to which industrial revolution was established in Britain. Due to this, machines started being used rapidly in Britain, new technologies, new factories started getting established. Along with this, urbanization and social changes also took place there. After the British Industrial Revolution, cheap textiles and other goods started being produced on a large scale by machines in England. Cheap and machine-made British textiles and other goods flooded the Indian markets. Cheap and machine-made British textiles and other goods flooded the Indian markets. Due to this, the demand for handmade products of Indian weavers, artisans and craftsmen decreases rapidly. Due to the Charter Act of 1813 and the policies of free trade, British goods started coming to India without any restriction. Whereas under the policies of the British government, heavy taxes were imposed on the export of Indian textiles. Due to this unequal competition, the products of Indian artisans could not compete with the cheap British machine-made goods. As a result, millions of weavers, artisans and craftsmen became unemployed. They were either forced to work as labor in agriculture or they went into deep poverty. Urban and traditional handicrafts industries started collapsing and they also started coming to an end, due to which poverty and unemployment increased even more in rural areas. The collapse of traditional industries caused severe damage to the Indian economy and turned India into export of raw materials and a market for British goods. Ultimately, the trade monopoly of the East India Company was completely ended in the 19th century, friends, because the monopoly of the East India Company on trade with India was ended by the Charter Act of 1813. After this act, other British merchants could also trade with India, but the company still got the monopoly of trade with China and the tea trade. Later, the Charter Act of 1833 also ended the company's monopoly of trade with China and the tea trade, and the company was converted into an administrative body, that is, a government corporation. Therefore, by the middle of the 19th century, the trade monopoly of the company was completely ended. After the revolt of 1857, the administration of India was taken away from the East India Company and handed over to the British Crown under the Government of India Act 1858. However, the formal dissolution of the company took place on 1 June 1874 under the East India Stock Dividend Redemption Act 1873. This was a significant step by the British government to end the rule of the East India Company and establish the British Raj in India. The company had no administrative or trading powers after 1858, but legally it continued to exist until 1874. Now let's talk about what benefits did the East India Company get from trade. So friends, The goods taken by the East India Company from India and China were sold at high prices in Europe, which gave the company huge profits in Europe. The company sent raw materials such as cotton cloth, etc. from India to the mills of Britain, which strengthened Britain's industrial revolution. The company received silver from China through opium trade, which it could use in India to trade very easily, and it could buy a lot of goods and send them to Europe. This triangular trade system strengthened the British economy a lot and provided immense wealth and power to the East India Company. Slowly, the company established political control in India by using tax collection and military power fronts, which later turned into British rule. And in this way, the British East India Company gradually succeeded in establishing political control over India, friends. In short, the East India Company mainly exported cotton cloths, spices, silk, opium, indigo, and salt from India and sold them in Europe and China. Tea, silk, and porcelain were bought from China and sent to Britain. The British East India Company initially shipped tea mainly from China to Europe. Tea cultivation in India began after 1830, and from then on, tea began to be exported from India as well. From Europe, the company bought woolen cloth, silver, and gold to India and China. These were used in local trade transactions, especially to buy tea and other goods. British industrial goods were also bought to India and China, but the demand for goods bought from Europe was limited in India and China. Silver and gold were bought mainly for payment, not as merchandise. The company's trade network was based on the triangular trade between India, China, and Europe, in which the opium trade was particularly profitable. Okay, so that's all for today's video, friends. In this, we saw what items the British used to trade from where, what did they bring, and what did they take. In the upcoming videos, we will talk about some special wars fought by the British in India. How much profit and loss did the British East India Company suffer by winning and losing these wars? How did they establish their British presidencies in India? We will read about all these things, friends. After this, we will see what was the situation of Bengal at that time. How did the British East India Company tighten its grip on Bengal? Why was the British East India Company on the verge of becoming completely bankrupt? Also, what important steps did the British government take to revive the East India Company? We will read about all these things in detail in our upcoming videos, friends, and will understand them one by one. Okay? If you like our video, please like it and give your opinion in the comment box. Also, if you have not yet subscribed to our channel, please subscribe to this channel and press the bell icon also, so that you can get more such videos of this channel first. Thank you for listening to us. See you in the next video. Until then, bye bye and take care. Thank you.